Dude, what is up? It is time for our September-October 2-for-1 special reading wrap-up. I was in Italy at the end of September and the beginning of October, so obviously I could not record for you our reading wrap-up, and I'm sorry that I missed it, but I decided just to do 2-for-1, like just combine it, because things are better together. Okay? So that's exactly what we're going to do. So the total between September and October was a total of 13 books, and that was 5,920, I think, 3 pages. Pretty good. I have to admit that I barely read anything in September, and a lot of things I started and stopped because when you're traveling, things just get weird. I'm sure you understand. So this just seemed the best way to do it. The way I do my wrap-ups is like this. I present the best of the best, my favorites of the month first, then I move on to the books that I thought are middle of the road reads, just okay, and then we go into the ones that I don't recommend and think probably aren't worth your time, and I tell you why, and usually I complain a little, and it's good fun. I do it this way so that you can stay for as long or as little as you want. You can just watch the best of the best, or you can watch all the way to the end and see what books you should maybe avoid or look out for, instead of just the books you definitely want to look out for in a good way. You know what I'm saying. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive on into this thing with the best of the best, according to me. First up is actually 2 books because we're doing this 2-for-1 special thing and we're really taking that as far as we can. These are the new series by Jennifer Armentrout. These are actually a continuation or a split off from their original series in this world, which is the Lux series that you may or may not have heard about. The Lux series is this ridiculously addicting, truly one of the most addicting series I have ever read. Sort of like a supernatural thriller with romance definitely in there. This is the only romance I will ever admit to reading because it's just that good, and the romance is done in a way that even I, with my cold dark heart, can appreciate. My friend Sophia actually told me about those books, and even though I thought they had terrible covers, and they really do, look at the original ones, like do a quick Google, it's hilarious. I looked at those covers and thought I'm not doing it, but Sophia convinced me, and thank God she did. Bless you, Sophia, you know I love you, because I was so hooked into those series. I read all, I think there's like 5 of them, I read all of them in about 2 weeks. Couldn't stop. So this is a branch off of that series from one of the characters near the end, or 2 of the characters near the end. And the thing about Jennifer, the author, is that she's so freaking good. Her characters are fantastic. I would read her grocery list. But the thing about her that I love is that she almost writes like a fan. And by that I mean, usually when they have these spin-off series, the author will sort of like, it's like a bait and switch. It's like you think you're gonna get one thing and then you read it and it's like not what you wanted, or it's never as good as the original. It's super hard to pull off. But Jennifer does this thing where she just gives you everything you could want. She really thinks about the fans, and she has all these little tie-ins from the original series in there, but this book and these 2 books can totally stand on their own. She just did a great job with it, but I would totally recommend reading the Lux series first, because that way you can fully appreciate everything that's in there. A great series overall, a great author. I want to read more by her. Next is a little non-fiction called Before and After: The Incredible Real-Life Stories of Orphans Who Survived the Tennessee Children's Home Society by Lisa Wingate and Judy Christie. So way back in the day, not that long ago, in 2017, Lisa Wingate's book Before We Were Yours, that talks about the Georgia Tan scandal in Tennessee, made my best historical fiction of the year. It was a fantastic book, and it talked about a subject that is really tricky to discuss, a darker chapter of U.S. history, with a lot of grace. And even though it's a really sad thing, she wrote about it with like an interesting dose of hope. So what happened when that book came out is that the survivors of that scandal, they're still being impacted today. And because of the nature of this scandal, which is an adoption scandal where Georgia Tan was this woman who from like the 1930s to 1950 something, like black marketed children, and she would steal some of them. It was just like a horrible, horrible thing. And then she would sell them for profit, and people thought that she was doing it for good. And she got away with a lot. She had a lot of connections. Truly terrible thing. But what happened as a result of Lisa writing a fiction novel about that scandal was that people who were impacted by that read it, and they reached out to Lisa, and it just started piling up, and they did a reunion so that people could meet and they could sort of continue that legacy and move forward with something hopefully more positive. So this was a really, really great book. It's a great continuation to Before We Were Yours. I would definitely recommend reading the historical fiction first and enjoying it because it's a great book, and then adding this on at the end and read it with friends. It would be a great book club book, and I think a lot of people have actually done that. So if you need one, Before We Were Yours, and then Before and After, really great. And Judy Christie, who wrote with her on this one, did a great job. She is more of a journalist style of writing, and that allowed her to interview some of these real survivors in this book and express their stories in a really, really beautiful way. I definitely teared up, and again, it is sad, but it's also a really hopeful story in a lot of ways, especially in this one. Another nonfiction I read this month that made it on the best list was Slow, Simple Living for a Frantic World by Brooke McAllory. I think that's how you say her name. Now, I have been into simple living, and I'm sort of continuing on that journey. I'm always on that journey, and it's actually something I want to share more with you guys. And I think this book is just a good reminder for me. It's just something that I enjoy reading about because it helps me sort of recenter. If you're curious about what slow living or simple living is, I will leave a link to my website, which sort of explains simple living in like a simple post that that's just the best way to describe it instead of rambling on here forever. And I'll be building out the rest of that section for that site through the end of the year and into the start of next year. So definitely keep an eye out on that if simple living, slow living is something that you are interested in. As far as for beginners, I'm not sure how this would do because it doesn't really necessarily explain things from a absolute base perspective, but what it does do is someone who knows a little bit about it and is curious, then there's some actual practical advice in here, and it's through the author's lens. She's sharing her experience, so I enjoyed it a great deal. Another nonfiction that made it on my best of list is actually by Winston Churchill, my old pal. We are now on a first name basis. So Winston wrote My Early Life. It is an autobiography, and wow, what can I say? The man truly lived. Lots of people know Winston Churchill's name, mostly from World War II, but this man, he was just incredible. He did so much. He did literally everything. And I found this work by him so inspiring. I actually read it because I saw it in an episode of The Crown, and I thought, hey, I should read that. It's a book and a show, so I read it, and it was really, really good. What you can expect from it is through his early life, so it's not talking about World War II, but what it does talk about his education, a little bit about his family, and then it talks about his time in his early military service and his work as a war correspondent. There's lots of great stories. Some of it is going to be interesting to different people. He was a fantastic writer, something that he was known for. His work will sort of diverge into different elements of his life. Like, for instance, I wasn't super interested in some of the military stuff, but some of the military stuff was awesome because he had these crazy great stories that were just a blast to read. So if you're at all interested in historical figures, or Winston, as I call him now, then definitely check it out. It was a great, great, great work, and I can't recommend it enough. I would definitely be interested to learn more about him. He just seems like a cool dude. You know what I mean? Another one I really enjoyed was Pumpkinheads by Faith Erin Hicks and Rainbow Rowell. This was a collaborative effort. It's a super cute graphic novel that is entirely October themed, and it was ridiculously adorable. It had so much good food in it. The art is amazing. It made me really hungry. It was like all the festive fall foods you can imagine and more are in here. And it's like a little love story. It's a little cutesiness, the typical Rainbow Rowell experience, but kind of brought to life in this color and these characters drawn by Faith Erin Hicks. So really fun if you like graphic novels. I don't usually read them, but it seemed like, a fun thing to do. So there it was. The next one is something I've been reading all year and a little bit from last year that I never finished. It used to be a lot thicker than this. Don't be mad, but Rick Steves actually says rip this book up. It's really about double the size. It's our Italy travel guide. Because we didn't want to carry the whole book around, we were hauling stuff. We took the author's advice and actually split the book up and then duct taped it back together just for the section we were in. So I did a ton of research for Italy, a ton, too much probably. So between last year and this year, I pretty much read the entire huge travel guide, and I actually thought what a strange hobby that would be to read travel guides, because there's some fascinating stuff. But what if there was a person who read travel guides and never went anywhere? I don't know. It was just a weird thought I had when I was reading this. Anyways, but the point is, Rick Steves is really the king when it comes to European travel. I read other travel books or sections of them, and nobody is as complete as Rick Steves is. So if you need a travel guide for your next trip to Europe, check out Rick Steves. And my recommendation, they're kind of expensive because it's a big, resource book. I would get a year or two before, this is 2017, and it was way cheaper than 2019. So Yeah, little tip from me to you. Last on the best of the best is something that I would always put at the top, but it's not fair to the other books because it is a reread. I did read The Two Towers, Book 2 in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm not sorry. You knew I would do it. I knew I would do it. I never intended to, but somehow it keeps happening. I don't know. Maybe I'll be able to contain myself and not reread anymore through the end of December. We'll see. No promises. That is it for the best of the best. So if that's all you wanted, I'll see you on the next one. But if you want to stick through to the middle of the road reads and my, I think, one skip book, then let's get to it. The first middle of the road book for me is one you might have seen around a little bit if you read general fiction. It is by Alice Hoffman and it is called The World That We Knew. This is a World War II era historical fiction. It's magical realism, which Alice Hoffman is of course known for. Now I've said this before, but I had a complete Alice Hoffman phase when I was a kid. I read every single book our little small town library had on her. I adored her work. I love it. There's something really special to me that speaks to me, like her art speaks to something inside me, like the way she writes and the way she makes normal things, like everyday normal things, seem so magical, really appeals to me. But like any author who has written as much as Alice Hoffman has written, some things are going to stand out more to you as a reader than others will, and some books will frankly be better than others. I thought The World That We Knew was about a 3.5-star book from Hoffman. It had all of her magical realism elements that I so appreciate and admire, and the folklore, all put in the midst of this very real, very sad World War II storyline. But something in the pacing felt a little bit missing to me, and it just wasn't up to her usual, what I consider super high standards. That's not to say it wasn't enjoyable, because it was. I just don't think I would recommend it to someone who's reading Alice Hoffman for the first time. I would say if you've read her before and you love her work, you know, why not go for it and continue the fun? But maybe it's not the best place to start fresh with Alice Hoffman if you've never experienced her work before. Another thing that I thought was interesting about this book was that it was so devastatingly sad and really beautifully so, but it's so sad that you stop feeling the sadness. That's something in our nature, I feel like, just human nature, that if something stays the same the whole time, you get used to it and it doesn't affect you anymore. So if something's constantly sad, constantly sad, constantly sad, you don't really feel it anymore. And the same if something was constantly happy, it would just become the middle, like that would become the meter, is that up happiness would become the middle. And I think that's what happened with the sad aspects of this book. There wasn't enough balance for me to appreciate the sad parts and appreciate the happy points, because there weren't very many happy points, if at all. So it was kind of, I don't know, I felt like it could have been better balanced, but still enjoyable. The next one I read was actually one I downloaded on my Kindle for travel, and it was my first sort of masculine thriller spy-ish novel. So, yeah. In this case, it's an assassin novel, and it is The Innocent by David Baldalcci. I'm pretty sure I'm saying his name horribly wrong, but what can you do? I've always wanted to try a book in this genre that's sort of like spy thriller, James Bond situation, and I'm still open to trying another one for sure, but parts of this book just kind of got annoying to me. Like sometimes it feels a little too cheesy or just a little too far in some regards. Some things just are not possible, but I can forgive that to a certain extent. Like obviously it's fiction. At first I really liked it. At first I was really, really roped in, but then I got kind of frustrated with the character, particularly the main character. I don't know how to explain this really, except sometimes you can really tell a book is written by a man. And like my husband has mentioned this too, where he'll be reading something and he'll say like, you can tell it's written, like it's I don't want to say masculine, but you can just tell it's written by a man, and it's so hard for me to like express what that is. It's like something in the language, it's something in the characters. I felt a similar way about Name of the Wind, which a lot of people loves and my husband loves, but just something about the character just irks me. I think it's just like too much of a hero complex. I don't know. It's a fine line, man. But for me, it just like wasn't a great read for me. But that being said, I am not the target reader for The Innocent, for David Baldalcci, for his work. So I completely understand why it was the way it was, and I think lots of people would super enjoy it. I just think, it just wasn't for me. So for my own personal rating, it's a middle of the road book. I thought it was fine, but for other people, I get why they love it. I get the appeal. That might have been my first experience with that type of book, and I'm glad I did it, and I'm going to try another one in the future, but it definitely won't be that series, and it'll probably be a different author, just that I can have a different experience, but in the same genre. Next up on the middle of the road list is Imaginary Friend. That is a horror novel that has been getting so much press, so much attention, so much hype, and lots of people have compared it to Stephen King and Joe Hill, and I agree. There's definitely an early Stephen King and definitely a Joe Hill vibe to it. I, in particular, got really heavy Nosferatu by Joe Hill vibes, just in this big scope storytelling of a horror novel where it's a bunch of different pieces of a bunch of different people and it all pieces together, but stylistically is so cohesive and consistent. That's not easy to do. So I definitely respect that aspect of it, but I feel like this book, Imaginary Friend, is a little bit overhyped. And I say that because I think it goes on way too long. And once this big reveal, you could call it a twist, but I don't want to call it a twist because I don't think that's fair to it either. There's like a shift in the narrative, right, later in the book. Everything after that, to me, seems like suddenly the book becomes something else where it was going along really great, and then all of a sudden it sort of becomes like too big for itself or something, or it's hard for me to find a way to phrase it the way I want to express it to you, but it all just becomes a little too much, and it can't rely on its own back history to support the change that happens, I feel. And besides that, it's just rambling. I feel like if like 200 pages had been edited out, it might have been better. But there's some really fantastic elements in there, so it's hard for me to say, for sure, yay or nay. So many of the elements were good and I really enjoyed it, but there's some negatives too. By the time I finished this book, I really wanted it to be done. I really wanted it to be over, and that is not a good feeling to have 700 pages in. So yeah, just food for thought. It's a really hyped book, so if you like horror, then you've probably seen it around, and it's up to you if you want to put it on your list. But just know it's definitely a hyped book, and that has its own consequences. You can't always trust all the hype. In case you missed the book description, I'll give you as brief a one as I can. It's about a little boy named Christopher who is being raised by a single mother. He starts out as a kid with dyslexia and quite possibly schizophrenic tendencies, and he's a really great kid, a really good kid, but intellectually he's not where he or his mother wants him to be. And then one day he disappears into the woods for 6 days, and when he comes back out, it's like everything changes. They win the lottery, he's suddenly really smart, and this catapults into a bunch of different elements. It's like a huge scope of work, so it's hard to really describe it, but it all starts culminating down to I could put it in one phrase from an older woman in the book who says, "We'll die on Christmas Day." And that's sort of like this deadline that we're going towards throughout this really long novel with a bunch of different pieces in it. That's the tiniest bit of info I can give you. If I explained it, we'd be here all day. The last book on my middle of the road list is The Last Namsara, and this is a YA book who the third book in the trilogy is coming out this November, and I have been sent books 1 and 2 by the publisher, and I will be sent book 3. So I will be finishing the trilogy because I'm going to have them, so I might as well. This is a really tricky reading experience for me because you can tell that this book was something that was started very young. Like, this is clearly an early attempt by an aspiring writer. I had that feeling, and then when I got to the end and I read the author's note, she said she started it when she was 17, and I thought, oh, well, you can tell. And that's to no offense, but I kind of feel like the book concept is so good. It's like dragons and a warrior princess, and it has so much potential and so many great imaginative ideas that you can see came from this mind of this really precocious, probably really awesome teenage girl who had all these thoughts she wanted to put down in a book. It doesn't have the understanding of story structure and background to tie it all together that you really, really need in fantasy like this. So there's elements I super loved about this, and I truly wish that it had been rewritten. I almost feel like it would have been better that way. But if you've been working on something for who knows how many years, I imagine it must be really hard to say, you know what, it might be better if I just take the idea and redo it. I also felt like this was a book that had been started and stopped a bunch of times. Something happens about the middle mark, the middle point, where it's almost like somebody else starts writing it, and like the voice and the tone changes, and it does improve in its style from the first half of the book, but it can't fix all the setup that the first half missed. So while I did enjoy it and I like this story idea so freaking much, I think it needs more flesh to its bones. And I'm hoping that the book 2 will be a different example of her writing, and I'll get to see how she progressed in her art and in her craftsmanship as she, weaves a story. And I hope that it's a little different, a little more well-rounded, but still her style, which was super easy to read. Like, I breezed through this, and that's fun in itself when you're reading like some more difficult, like heavier nonfiction. It's fun to have a book like this that you can just fly through. So I appreciated that about it, and I liked a lot of the elements, but I just wish it had been knitted together a little more neatly. That's it for the best of and the borrow it books, and now we're going to get down to my one skip it book, and this is again like another hard one for me to talk about, and this is where I'm going to complain a little bit. So if you like it when I do that, I hope you're here for the fun. So let's get into it. This is a book I would say to probably skip. It is Fair Play. The subtitle is A Game-Changing Solution for When You Have Too Much to Do and More Life to Live. Now listen, okay? I'm a nerd. I really enjoy binge watching cleaning videos on YouTube. I like stuff about making a home. I find it weirdly fascinating, okay? I don't know what that's about, but I just do. So stuff like this, where it's kind of about self-development and how to manage a household, that super appeals to me, and I'm very interested in gaining skills in that area. Like, I always want to be doing better because it's something we all have to do, right? So we might as well learn how to do it good so we can enjoy it. The way this book was pitched, the description to me, and it came in this super cool PR box, like a beautifully designed PR box. Like, I love the cover too. Like, I think it's a beautifully made and well-presented book. But when it was pitched to me, I thought that this was going to be about what I just said, which is household management and how to communicate with your family, whether that be, a live-in boyfriend, your partner, your husband, your wife, like your siblings that you live with, your roommate, whoever. I thought it was just going to be about managing a home and what it takes, all that, what's termed invisible work, which is all the stuff that you have to do to basically to set up a base for your life to happen on, right? I would have been super interested in that topic, and this concept is supposed to be a game, like a figurative game that you play where you deal cards and you get to determine who's doing what, and you kind of assign tasks so that everyone feels like their work is balanced. And it's supposed to be, what I thought, a good way to open that conversation and have those talks with whoever you live with so that you can all live more peacefully and successfully together. What this ended up being is a book that is for a very specific audience, and it's going to be very rare that you are that audience. This book is really for probably middle-aged women with children who are really dissatisfied with their husbands. Now, there's a fine line between like any of those types of discussions where you feel like some things are appropriate and you're like, wow, that's sad that people feel that way, and I think that we should have a conversation about having the hard conversations, But what this book does is really just complain. And I am not interested in that. I am interested in solutions. I'm interested in talking about how to be better, but within yourself. Because I feel like when you're better in yourself, you can be better with other people, and your life just gets better. I'm not interested in the message that it's like someone else's fault. Like, I think if stuff's wrong, then it's probably somewhat to do with you. Like, wield your power better or something. I don't know. And I think it's interesting how the definition of feminism has changed in the last, I don't even know, decade or so. And that's like a whole other conversation we could have. But the point is that this book is really pitting men against women. It's saying like men are the worst, women do it all. And I'm not really sure how that is a helpful narrative. I'm not sure how that's a helpful perspective, I guess I should say. I would rather this book had been about having that conversation if there are people who have trouble and who are dissatisfied. Let's make a book about coming together on it and not separating people. It's really hard to describe. I know I'm not the only one who felt this way, and it also really pigeonholed the book. The system itself could be for anyone. Like I said, your partner, your roommate, whoever, could be for anybody. But she decided to make it strictly for women with children who are really dissatisfied. And I don't know. I felt like it could have been a way better experience, and it could have been way more open to all different types of people, but that's just me. So I was kind of bummed because I wanted more from it, and I thought that it was going to be more well-rounded, and it ended up just being kind of angsty. And there are some really good tips in there, and I feel like the system itself is not a bad system. I just don't like the way it was delivered, I guess. So that is it for our reading wrap-up. I had to complain there a little at the end. Whenever there's a skip it book, I'm never very happy about it. But that one book aside, there were so many fantastic books this month. Even the middle of the road ones were still pretty freaking good. So I'm really happy with September and October mashed up together, our 2-for-1 deal. There were some good books in there, man. 15 books total, over 5,000 pages read. I'm not complaining, especially for 2 weeks of travel. Not bad. I want to thank you for watching, hanging out with me today. It's so good to see you. I know we took a break because I was away on vacation, but girl, I'm back and I'm ready to hang with you. Before you head off, drop a comment below. Let me know what books you've been loving or hating lately. Either way, you know I love to talk to you about books. And if you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, but you do like all things bookish, then I am your girl. So go ahead, press that subscribe button, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.